It was a perfect summer afternoon in an upscale Atlanta neighborhood. Marcus Bennett, a refreshed police officer with 15 years of service, sat back in his lounge chair by his dream pool, enjoying the warmth of the Georgia sun. After years of saving, working overtime, and sacrificing, he had finally bought his perfect home, a stunning 2-story house with a crystal clear pool shimmering in his backyard. But just as he took a sip of his iced tea, his peace was shattered by the wail of approaching sirens. 2 patrol cars screeched to a halt in front of his driveway, their lights flashing as officers stepped out with hands hovering over their holsters. Marcus sat up instantly, his police instincts kicking in, but he already knew exactly who was responsible for this disturbance. Through the corner of his eye, he saw her, the woman who had been making his life a nightmare ever since he moved to Nancy Whitmore, standing behind her curtains, her phone still in hand, a smug expression on her face. This wasn't the first time she had done this, and Marcus had a sinking feeling it wouldn't be the last. 2 months earlier, he had been the happiest man alive, moving into the house he had worked his entire life for. He had barely finished unpacking when he first noticed Nancy, watching him from her window like a self-appointed neighborhood gatekeeper. At first, Marcus had given her the benefit of the doubt, waving politely, but she simply disappeared behind her curtains. He had encountered people like her before, people who thought they got to decide who belonged and who didn't. The next day, as Marcus was out buying supplies, his security camera pinged an alert to his phone. Curious, he opened the app and was shocked at what he saw. There, bold as daylight, was Nancy Whitmore walking right into his backyard like she owned the place. Wearing an expensive suit and carrying a designer beach towel, she casually made herself comfortable, dipping her feet into his pool. When Marcus returned and confronted her, Nancy had the nerve to act surprised. "Oh," she exclaimed, placing a hand over her chest in mock innocence. "I thought you were the new pool maintenance guy. The previous owners always let me use their pool." Her condescending tone sent a wave of heat through Marcus, but he kept his composure, years of de-escalation training stopping him from reacting. "Mom," he said, his voice firm but controlled. "I'm not the maintenance guy. I'm the new owner." He watched as her expression twisted, her lips curling into an uncomfortable smirk. "You? The owner?" She laughed nervously, her voice dripping with disbelief. "There must be some mistake. I know the realtor who sold this house." And she never mentioned. Her words trailed off, but the implication hung thick in the air. Marcus folded his arms, his patience running thin. "There's no mistake, Mrs. Whitmore. This is my home. You're trespassing. Please leave." Nancy's eyes flickered with something dark and mean, but she gathered her things slowly, muttering under her breath, "We'll see about that." It wasn't just a snide remark, it was a promise. And over the next few weeks, she made good on it. At first, it was subtle harassment. One morning, Marcus woke up to anonymous complaints to the HOA about his unkempt yard despite his lawn being immaculate. His morning newspaper mysteriously went missing. The neighborhood Facebook page started filling with cryptic messages about certain new homeowners bringing down the community. But then Nancy escalated her game. One Saturday morning, Marcus was woken by the sounds of laughter and splashing. He pulled back his curtains and froze. There, in his backyard, was Nancy hosting a full-blown pool party with guests. Marcus stormed outside, his voice booming. "You need to leave." "No, this is private property." Nancy, reclining on his pool chair, waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, don't be difficult, Marcus. We're just having a little fun. Besides, this pool barely gets any use." Her guests shifted awkwardly, realizing they had walked into something they shouldn't have. One of the women whispered. Nancy said she had permission. Nancy stood, her smirk returning. "Go ahead, call the cops," she said, crossing her arms. "My husband plays golf with Captain Richards. Let's see how far you get." That was the last straw. That afternoon, Marcus installed security cameras. If she wanted to play dirty, he was going to fight back legally, methodically, and with receipts. Within days, his cameras caught her, testing his gate, peering through his windows, and even trying to use an old key copy from the previous owners. But she wasn't done yet. The final straw came when Marcus returned home from the grocery store one evening and found not just Nancy, but 8 of her friends lounging by his pool, drinking wine and laughing like they owned the place. This time, he didn't hesitate. He called the police. When the officers arrived, Nancy switched tactics immediately. "Oh, officers, thank God you're here," she cried, her voice full of fake distress. "This man is harassing us. We've always had access to this pool, and now he's just being unreasonable." Officer Davis and Martinez, both of whom had served alongside Marcus, exchanged looks before turning to Nancy. "Mom," Officer Martinez cut in sharply. "Marcus Bennett was one of our best officers. If he says you're trespassing, you're trespassing. Please leave before we have to make this official." Nancy's face flushed red as her book club members hurriedly grabbed their things and scurried out like guilty criminals. But before leaving, she leaned in close, her voice venomous. "This isn't over, Marcus." He stared at her, unfazed. "Oh, I know." That night, as Marcus reviewed his security footage, he felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just about his house anymore. This was about putting an end to Nancy's entitlement, once and for all. And he had just the perfect plan to do it. Nancy wasn't done. In the following days, she doubled down on her harassment. Anonymous complaints about Marcus's home flooded the whole board. Neighbors whispered about disturbances at his address, and suddenly his trash bins were being knocked over in the middle of the night. But Marcus didn't react, he had a plan. He knew that Nancy's biggest weakness wasn't just her entitlement, but her own arrogance. One evening, as he reviewed his security footage, he caught something that made his blood boil. Nancy, under the cover of darkness, sneaking into his yard and sprinkling plant killer over his carefully maintained roses. That was it. He wasn't just going to fight back, he was going to make sure she never tried this again. He remembered a conversation he once had with an old police buddy about a certain type of non-toxic, temporary pool dye, a harmless but humiliating chemical used by maintenance crews to detect leaks. The best part, it only activated when mixed with sunscreen or cosmetics. And Marcus had already noticed Nancy and her friends always lathered on layers of expensive sunscreen before sneaking into his pool. He placed an order immediately, smiling to himself. Sometimes, the best revenge wasn't about getting even, it was about teaching a lesson they'd never forget. A few days later, the timing was perfect. Through the neighborhood grapevine, Marcus learned that Nancy was planning yet another unauthorized pool party. She told her friends it was a gathering to uphold neighborhood standards, which really just meant making Marcus feel unwelcome in his own home. But instead of stopping her, Marcus prepared meticulously. He installed additional hidden cameras to capture every angle of the pool. He added the dye to the water, making sure it remained crystal clear until it came into contact with sunscreen. Then, on Saturday morning, he made sure Nancy saw him leave, or at least that's what she thought. In reality, he parked around the corner and slipped back inside, waiting in his home office with a perfect view of the pool. Right on schedule, his security app pinged Nancy was testing his back gate. This time, Marcus wasn't angry. He simply grabbed his phone, leaned back in his chair, and pressed record. At precisely 2 p.m., Nancy made her grand entrance. She strutted through Marcus's gate like she owned the place, followed by 6 of her friends, all carrying designer beach bags, expensive sunglasses, and overpriced champagne. They lounged by the pool, giggling, oblivious to the trap that awaited them. "Ladies, welcome to our Saturday retreat," Nancy announced, raising her glass. What Marcus doesn't know won't hurt him. The women giggled, completely unaware of what was about to happen. One by one, they slathered on their expensive sunscreen, the same luxury brands Marcus had specifically tested. Nancy was the first to dive in, making a dramatic splash. "The water is perfect," she called out. One by one, her friends followed, laughing and splashing like they had no care in the world. But then it happened. It started subtly, a faint green tint blooming along Nancy's arms. Then Susan, one of her friends, froze mid-laugh. Nancy, is your skin looking different?" Nancy looked down at her hands and let out a scream that could have shattered glass. Her normally pale skin was turning a vibrant, unmistakable shade of green, not a light tint, not a slight discoloration, but a deep, fluorescent, St. Patrick's Day level green. Within seconds, every woman in the pool was shrieking, scrambling out of the water as their expensive makeup streaked down their faces in green rivulets. "My daughter's wedding is next week," one woman wailed, staring in horror at her now green legs. Nancy's face contorted in rage as she frantically scrubbed her skin, but it was no use, the dye was set and would take days to fade. Then, she spotted at one of Marcus's security cameras, its red light blinking cheerfully. Her humiliation was complete. The exodus that followed was legendary, 6 green-tinted women sprinting through the neighborhood in their designer swimsuits, leaving trails of wet footprints on the sidewalk. Marcus edited the footage perfectly, adding clips of Nancy's previous trespassing incidents, her arrogant remarks, and the final pool party disaster, all set to soft jazz music, the very same music they had been playing by his pool. The video hit social media like a nuclear bomb. Within hours, it had millions of views across multiple platforms. Local news stations picked up the story. Trespassing Nancy Gets Green with Envy became a viral headline. Even Nancy's real estate agency couldn't ignore it. Their Facebook page was flooded with green emojis and clients asking if they could trust an agent who trespassed on private property. But the best part, the neighborhood finally turned on her. People who had once ignored Marcus suddenly found their voices. She did the same thing to the Johnsons last year, one neighbor posted. Remember when she called the cops on that kid's lemonade stand? Another added. The dam of silence broke, and for the first time, Nancy had no defenders. But Nancy wasn't ready to give up. She tried to do damage control. She posted a tearful video, trying to spin the narrative in her favor. I was just trying to maintain community standards, she insisted, her green-tinged face glowing under the camera lights. It backfired spectacularly. Instead of sympathy, people mocked her mercilessly. The comments flooded in. The Wick Witch of Atlanta. Nancy the Green Goblin. How's that community standard working out for you? And then, the final blow. Nancy's lawyer sent Marcus a cease and desist letter, demanding he remove the video. Marcus's response was simple, a compilation of her trespassing, her vandalism, and her repeated police warnings, all complete with timestamps. You can't prove that pool dye was meant for us, her lawyer argued. Marcus simply sent back the footage of her stealing his newspaper, peering into his windows and sneaking into his yard at night. That ended that conversation. The neighborhood dynamic shifted overnight. People who had once avoided Marcus now stopped to chat. Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived across the street, even brought him homemade empanadas. I should have spoken up sooner, she admitted. Nancy reported my Christmas decorations to the HOA for being too ethnic. But the best moment came when Marcus saw a for sale sign appear in front of Nancy's house. She had finally given up. But her humiliation wasn't over yet. At her final HOA meeting, she tried to complain about dangerous pool chemicals, only for someone in the back to start humming It's Not Easy Being Green. The entire room erupted in laughter. Nancy stormed out, her face still tinged with the faintest hint of green. Marcus? He simply sat back and enjoyed the show. Nancy's humiliation was absolute, but the fallout from her own actions was just beginning. Even after her green tint had finally faded, her reputation never recovered. Everywhere she went, people whispered and smirked. Her clients stopped returning her calls, and her once thriving real estate business collapsed overnight. Her husband, a well-known businessman, was overheard venting his frustrations at his country club. Do you know how hard it is to close deals when your wife is literally green? He complained. She can't even show houses right now. People keep asking if she's feeling okay. His friends chuckled uncomfortably, clearly trying not to get involved. If you find these stories inspiring and they motivate you to take action, please comment 9. If not, comment 0. Your feedback means a lot to us. Thank you for your valuable time. The final straw came when Nancy's HOA allies, the same people she had once intimidated and manipulated, turned their backs on her. Without her influence, the HOA meetings became shorter and less hostile. Newer residents, once afraid of Nancy's opinions, began speaking up and challenging old rules. The community, once filled with unnecessary drama, became more welcoming than ever before. With her power shattered and her business in ruins, Nancy put her house on the market. But selling wasn't easy. Every time a potential buyer showed interest, someone in the neighborhood mentioned the Green Karen incident. Realtors tried to downplay it, but buyers weren't convinced. No one wanted to move into the house of the woman who had become a viral cautionary tale. With Nancy gone, the entire neighborhood changed for the better. People who had once kept their heads down were now more open and connected. The whole meetings, once filled with complaints about property values and nonsense rules, became focused on real issues that actually mattered. Marcus's pool, once a source of conflict, became the heart of the community. He started hosting official neighborhood gatherings, complete with barbecues, swimming lessons for kids, and even outdoor movie nights by the pool. Families who had barely spoken before now bonded over shared meals and laughter. Tom, the neighbor from 2 doors down, gave Marcus a knowing nod one evening. He said, flipping a burger, I've lived here for 20 years, and this is the first time I actually feel like I know my neighbors. Children splashed in the pool without fear of being yelled at for lowering property values. Parents, who had once felt judged for not being prestigious enough, now felt welcomed and appreciated. The neighborhood, once controlled by one woman's ego, had transformed into a thriving, friendly community. And for the first time in a long time, people were genuinely happy. A few months later, Marcus received an unexpected email from an old friend, a reporter, who had been following the Green Karen saga from the beginning. The subject line simply read, You're not going to believe this. Curious, Marcus clicked on it and read the message carefully. Within seconds, he burst out laughing. Nancy, now living in another state, was making headlines again. Apparently, she had moved into a new upscale neighborhood and immediately started causing problems. Her new HOA had already received multiple complaints about her demanding access to a neighbor's private tennis court. Marcus leaned back in his chair, shaking his head, realizing that some people never learn. For a brief moment, he considered sending her a message just to see if she still had a slight green tint left in her skin. But he decided against it. Karma was already doing its job. Instead, he poured himself a glass of lemonade, leaned back, and enjoyed his peaceful, drama-free neighborhood. Nancy was someone else's problem now. One afternoon, Marcus was lounging by the pool, reflecting on everything that had happened. He glanced at a small framed photo he had placed near the pool gate, a freeze frame from the security footage capturing the exact moment Nancy realized she had turned green. It was a reminder not just of what he had endured, but of the power of standing your ground with dignity and strategy. Nancy had tried to bully him out of his own home, but in the end, she was the one who lost everything. Meanwhile, Marcus hadn't stooped to her level. He had simply let her own arrogance be her downfall. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about letting people destroy themselves with their own choices. And Marcus had won without ever having to raise his voice. That's the thing about karma. It doesn't always come fast, but when it does, it's poetic, powerful, and sometimes a little green. Marcus had never set out for revenge, but in the end, justice had been served in the most satisfying way possible. He took a sip of his lemonade, feeling the warm sun on his skin, and smiled to himself. A new family moved into Nancy's old house, an interracial couple with twin daughters. They were welcomed with open arms, and Marcus even invited them over for a backyard barbecue. The girls joined a local swim team, and Marcus helped them practice in his pool on weekends. The house, once a symbol of pettiness and entitlement, was now filled with laughter and friendship. One day, the new homeowners curiously asked about the framed photo by the pool. "What's this?" the husband asked, pointing to the image of 6 green-tinted women fleeing the yard. Marcus just grinned and took another sip of his lemonade. "Oh, that's a reminder that karma always makes a splash." The husband chuckled, and his wife shook her head in amusement. "Well, I guess we won't be sneaking into your pool anytime soon." Marcus raised his glass in a toast and said, "You're welcome anytime, just ask first." The couple laughed, and just like that, another friendship was formed. Nancy's name faded from the neighborhood, but her legacy lived on, not as a symbol of power, but as a cautionary tale. Every year during the neighborhood Labor Day barbecue, someone would inevitably bring up the story. And every year, new neighbors would listen in disbelief and delight. Wait, you're telling me a woman actually turned green for a week?" "Yep," and she ran through the neighborhood screaming. "Oh, you should have seen it. Her face looked like a frustrated, wicked witch of the West. Man, I wish I had been here for that." And so, the story of Green Karen lived on, retold like a neighborhood legend, reminding everyone that entitlement, arrogance, and sheer pettiness always come with a price. That price, sometimes it's just a little splash of karma. Marcus had never set out for revenge. He had only wanted to be left alone in his own home. But when Nancy pushed too far, she learned the hard way that some battles aren't won with anger, they're won with patience, strategy, and a perfectly timed lesson in humility. So, if you've ever had to deal with a Karen in your life, remember this: sometimes the best way to handle entitled behavior isn't to fight fire with fire, it's to let karma do its thing. And make sure you've got good security cameras. Oh, and maybe keep some pool dye handy. Life has a way of teaching lessons, and sometimes karma delivers them better than we ever could. This story isn't just about a petty neighbor who got what she deserved. It's about the power of standing your ground with dignity. When faced with unfair treatment, the natural instinct is to lash out, to fight fire with fire. But true strength lies in patience, strategy, and letting people's own actions be their downfall. Marcus didn't seek revenge. He simply let karma do what it does best: hold people accountable in ways they never expected. In life, you will encounter people who try to intimidate you, disrespect you, and make you feel like you don't belong. But here's the truth: you don't have to prove your worth to anyone. The best response to ignorance and entitlement isn't rage, it's success, resilience, and refusing to let negativity define you. When you handle challenges with wisdom and composure, you don't just win the battle, you win the war. So the next time someone tries to push you down, remember this: you don't have to destroy them. Just step back, let karma handle the heavy lifting, and watch as life teaches them the lesson they refuse to learn.